Hello, I'm Stephen Robinson. Welcome to the Playtyper Guy podcast. Joining me again is my friend and colleague, Noah Berlatsky. How are you, Noah?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Noah writes for the great Substack we subscribe to. Everything is horrible, and everything sort of is right now.
It keeps being true, unfortunately.
And I'd reached out to you after your recent piece in response to a lot of what we've been seeing occurring after Charlie Kirk's murder. And as I was mentioning to you before we started recording, I had originally never even planned to talk about Charlie Kirk in depth.
I didn't realize that it was going to be the thing. I didn't realize that. Obviously it's horrible, but there are unfortunately horrible shootings.
Yes,
with some frequency, and I don't necessarily feel I need to weigh in on all of them.
Yeah, it was campus. It's a campus shooting. I knew the right would attempt to leverage it. I knew they would be terrible about it. I knew this sort of stuff would occur. I think, and I get a sense from you as well, what to me was first from many politicians, but specifically Governor Gavin Newsom, and then the article from Ezra Klein that suggested that Kirk was someone who, as I described, this affable Alex P. Keaton, engaging in good faith with people and debating.
Basically said that he was the model for substantive good faith engagement across political differences.
And that's just fundamentally untrue. That is not what he was doing. To date myself, Kirk was born when I was in college. And I was at the University of Georgia. I would say people talk about college campuses being this liberal, progressive indoctrination center, which is its own sort of both insane, potentially anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. But it was a very right-leaning. The people who ran the paper were right-leaning, and even they would not have printed stuff that Charlie Kirk, that type of rhetoric, basically ad hominem attacks, you'd have to work for it. There'd have to be sort of a William F. Buckley style way that you're going to engage on these issues, some plausible deniability about your bigotry, but not clearly, essentially conservative shock jock tactics would never get published. And there was a guy who would try to mimic Rush Limbaugh at the time. He even his column photo was sort of like this, which is the way Rush Limbaugh posed on the cover of his first book. He was a very heavy guy, so he sort of was and he would submit pieces that were sort of doing what Limbaugh would do, using nicknames, using a lot of stuff, granted, that our president does now. So it's not that, but at the time was again, a conservative, editorial base paper would you can't print this stuff. It is not acceptable. It is beneath the dignity of how we debate. And to see people holding up Kirk, especially in that business, like Ezra Klein, it's like him sitting down with someone from the Weekly World News or the people who chased Princess Diana to her death and saying that this is journalism done the right way.
Yeah, Jim El-Bouy said, the part of it is probably, when somebody dies in this horrible, violent fashion, there's an impetus to try to find something good to say about him. Because, obviously assassination is horrible. People, I don't watch videos like that, but, people saw this horrible video where he, was died on camera. It's really upsetting. And I think so there's an impetus to try to find something good about him. So that's one thing. But kind of what I talked about in my piece is also, Charlie Kirk had sort of a range of sort of what he did. So one thing he did was that he was very involved in kind of MAGA organizing. So he, he helped organize January 6th. He bussed people there. One of the people on his bus actually, was one of the people who hit law enforcement with a with a fire extinguisher. There was somebody who did really violent stuff, and so he's kind of got that aspect where he's sort of this organizer and kind of a power broker and somebody who does this kind of organizing. And then he's also got this thing where he, he's kind of like, he's got this kind of shock jock radio show, which is for people in the MAGA world. That's the radio show that, the podcast that JD Vance took over, which is like, red meat, basically, for the base, where he says a lot of just like horrific things, like just open racism, talks about, how stoning LGBT people is, sort of like a godly thing to do, et cetera, et cetera. And then he's got this thing where he goes to college campuses and debates, and also debates people, a lot of progressives, a lot of people on the left. He'll get on a stage and he'll do his thing, and he'll, so that's kind of one thing he does. And I think that what that does in part is that a lot of progressives who appear with him, or a lot of people on the left who appear with him, see him as a colleague, right?
Mm-hmm.
They see him as a peer, they see him as a colleague, they see him as somebody who's in the same business as them, and he treats them, fairly respectfully, as you would colleagues, like, because he's engaged with them in sort of a mutual promotion enterprise, and he doesn't, he's, he was about making money. He doesn't want to like kill the golden goose, right? He sees, so there were people who, well, Gavin Newsom, had Charlie Kirk on his podcast. So, part of his comments are like, this is my friend. This is somebody who, I worked with, and who, like, we promoted each other. And Rachel Bittkoffer, who's a election analyst and a professor, she had a post where she was like, I was on a stage with Charlie Kirk and he was nice to me. And so I see him as, so his hateful shtick must be an act. And, Ben Burgess, who's a left-wing writer who often writes for Jacobin and often does debates. He and Megan Day wrote a piece for Jacobin, which was basically, they were kind of chastising people for celebrating the assassination and arguing that, to the extent, there aren't a lot of people celebrating it. I think most people were like, this is horrible and likely to result in lots of bad things too. But they also like had this whole thing where they were like, Charlie Kirk debated Ben, right? And while he did that, he was like not personally attacking Ben. And also, it's good that he debates us because our arguments are better, and so we get to, basically arguing that Charlie Kirk was helpful to the left because he was like allowing for debate. And there's not really, and so it's all through what I call chattering class solidarity. It's through this sense that he is one of us, and there's not really, much interest in looking at, holy shit, this guy helped organize an insurrection. Is that how we want to do democracy? This guy, does in fact, he's not slurring Ben Burgess, who's a white guy who he's like mutually promoting, but he does say just horrific things about Black women and about the, which are, they're not like logical arguments. They're smears. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
You as a Black woman don't deserve, can't be smart. You can't actually deserve. It's just, it's straight up racism. And so, there's kind of like this, all they see is this guy who's a colleague and who's friends. And they say, oh, he's like me. We're in this together. And there's not really a sense of solidarity with the law enforcement people who, Charlie Kirk Charlie Kirk's, sort of like bust-in people beat, or or the people who Charlie, the other big thing Charlie Kirk did is he has this professor's watch list where he has tells, there's a list, and he tells far-right ghouls, these are bad people, these are the cancer of the left in the university, go send them death threats. And you look around online and it's not hard to find people people who are talking about having been on that list and being harassed for years, right? And just like horrible racial slurs, like death threats. Obviously, like, it makes it, people who are like, I need to get security, right? And and who are worried for the safety of their families, right?
Yeah.
And and I think and so there's like, I can't remember who was saying this, but like, there's like not a lot of discussion of that in mainstream media. Ta-Nehisi Coates, wrote this really excellent essay, and I think Vanity Fair, where he said, Ezra Klein doesn't quote the guy. Ezra Klein was talking about how great Charlie Kirk was and how he did politics right, but he doesn't actually quote anything he says. He isn't actually putting in front of you what
these great ideas he had,
what these great ideas are, and
he says, I appreciate the growth, like what he did, and I found that astonishing, because Ezra Klein is someone I've read his work. He will talk about how corrosive our politics have gotten, the damage that's been done, and then he will be like, oh, well, you have to hand it to Charlie Kirk for what he has built. It's like, well, he directly contributed to that corrosive politics. And that, to me, is the biggest thing, that you're not allowed. You have these people, CNN, there was a whole panel of people on CNN talking about how can we get past this? I have this thing of like, this corrosive politics, we can just agree and not get personal, without discussing the fact that Charlie Kirk was one of the greatest contributors to corrosive politics, ad hominem attacks, smears, demeaning, and was radicalizing people. Studies have shown he was very unpopular amongst actual college students, and the people he did well with he wasn't like necessarily changing minds. He was going, and for people who felt, and arguably for the first time in their lives, isn't that probably what happens? The most biggest complaint from right-leaners or white guys who go to a college campus is like, they're, for the first time in their lives, feel like a minority, even though they're not, but like in a world of where their thoughts are not considered as golden, and they were being radicalized. They're sort of, and you could go on his YouTube of like, Charlie Kirk crushes, destroys, dominates. This type of stuff that's toxic, and the idea that you could not discuss that without, as JD Vance would say, you are to talk about the fact that he was a terrible figure publicly, was to justify his murder, which is obviously not something, if God forbid anything were to happen to AOC or or Biden or anyone else, that they are going to say, oh, we can't ever state that we ever disagreed with these people.
When Jimmy Carter died, Trump was like, oh yeah, he was a horrible person. And Trump doesn't even, the Minnesota state legislature, Melissa Hortman, who was, Trump was asked about her the other day, and he was like, oh, I don't know who that is. It was only months ago.
Kash Patel said he did not know who Dylan Roof is. This is stuff that's playing to the base, but also it shows a degree of contempt for, from this administration, from the MAGA world. Dylan Roof doesn't matter. What he did does not to murdering Black churchgoers, even though they were doing what we would say, evangelicals would applaud. They're in church or whatever. We don't care. His actions don't matter to us.
I think it's interesting, Ezra Klein, like, one of the things he said, he kind of said he doesn't really know. He wrote that piece. He doesn't really know anything about Charlie Kirk. He kind of said, I don't really know about Charlie Kirk, and he also said, well, you've got to look to find the good at this moment, kind of acknowledging that he wasn't really looking to say true things. He was looking to say things that he felt would be politically helpful or expedient. And I think that kind of goes to, what you're saying is that, and when I think about it in this kind of discussion is, redemption or post-reconstruction. The redemption, if you watch Birth of a Nation, right, which is, I think, an important touchstone for neo-Confederate ideology. Birth of a Nation is about how, it's a call for bipartisanship, right? The movie is about how the Civil War broke us apart, and we need to unify and come together and stop this kind of hateful partisan division. And what that means in that context is that white people need to come together and subjugate Black people. That's what bipartisanship means in Birth of a Nation. That's what bipartisanship means in neo-Confederate ideology. And that's a lot of what bipartisanship means today still. The reason that Ezra Klein is so excited about talking to Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk is that there's this feeling that our problem is partisanship. Our problem is that we're too divided. And what we need to do is to build bridges. And basically, white people, what does that mean? It means that, white people kind of need to come together, and we need to, just accept that Black people aren't going to advance, trans people aren't going to advance, immigrants aren't going to advance. We're gonna sweep them all aside, and it's going to be white people uniting. And obviously, they don't, that's not really how they want to think about it. Martin Luther King talks about how, you can't have peace without justice isn't peace. And
but they talk about the family unit, right? The idea of, again, sort of the Civil War, brother versus brother. They talk about the idea when they Jessica Tarlov on Fox News, and so and Jesse Water, they love the idea of oh, this is just the liberal sister and the MAGA brother, but they otherwise get along. That is very encouraging to them, even though where they disagree is on the fundamental humanity of other people.
How can you lower the political temperature when you've got ICE agents running around Chicago kidnapping people? These are you're oh, well, we need to unite as a family. And these and the whole goal of the administration is to rip these families apart, right?
Yeah.
Where's the grounds? What are we uniting on?
Well, and to your point, when we talk about it's interesting where bipartisanship is, and Joe Manchin had reared his particularly annoying head about this recently, but bipartisanship is never just hey, look, I'm a Republican. I just want to give rich people tax cuts. Why do I care about what amounts to 2% of the population being able to live in decency? I'll sign on to that. Of course, and let me screw some poor people. All right, sign up. You would think logically, a lot of these things that would be trans rights should be bipartisan, right? In theory, it compared to other things that are far more contentious, if it's not all about. And so when you get the people, the bipartisan crusaders, all of them white men or white, women, would be okay, well, here's what we should do. And it's always LGBTQ rights is too divisive. Don't talk about Blackness too much, and all these sort of things that it's well, shouldn't that be the bipartisan? That's the easiest thing to do.
I think it's pretty telling that Joe Manchin, the big, his big push for bipartisanship is we're not going to get rid of the filibuster. And so what did that mean? I mean, it meant that it's still okay to disenfranchise Black people. Like the bipartisanship is disenfranchising Black people. The bipartisanship is gutting abortion rights.
Yeah.
Like the bipartisanship is like, well, we can come together and agree that these other people shouldn't vote or these other people shouldn't have bodily autonomy. And that's what neo-Confederacy was.
And there was some very convenient scapegoating with that, where he said it was Schumer and Biden trying to appeal to the radical left to get rid of the filibuster. And Biden and Schumer were never like, let's get rid of the filibuster so we can pass AOC's Green New Deal, or we can ban guns. Like there was no, what anyone could reasonably say was a radical. It was literally voting rights and abortion rights after a rigged Supreme Court obliterated a long-held constitutional right for half the nation. And for Manchin to retroactively spin that, I found that appalling. As somehow the radical left wanted, also both of those issues had tremendous real bipartisan support, as far as voters, when they polled consistently. And it's something I'm not sure about this because it happens all the time. You're a little bit more probably liberal on certain issues than I am. I'm more liberal than certain other people on issues. And what often happens is and I get this, that during elections, it's we nominate someone that we consider the reasonable choice. So Joe Biden gets it's not Liz Warren, it's not Bernie Sanders, and I feel like the same thing might happen later if it's Alyssa Slotkin and not AOC or something. These mainstream they get elected, they don't do well. Like Biden objectively, we can talk. I'm more about polling. Obviously, he did not successfully have a second term. And then the folks who are sort of well, he's your mainstream guy, then come back and say it's all because of the left. The left forced him to take these positions. And so it's almost okay, well, why did we not just have Sanders? I'm not pushing for Sanders, but why didn't we just have Warren? If we're going to take all the blame.
And I think it's kind of, I think a lot of that is somewhat disingenuous because, people sort of phrase all their concerns around elections, right? It's always well, if you just did what I said, we'd win all the time. But of course, the thing is, you can't win all the time in a democracy. It's just not possible.
Mm-hmm.
If you can win all the time, it's kind of not a democracy anymore. And, the real issue is less, to me, at the moment, the real issue is less that because, the Democrats are doing really well in special elections right now, and polling is good. They don't really have a problem winning elections. They win elections all the time. What we really have a problem with is that when they were in office, they didn't do things to prevent fascism.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't pass, they didn't pass election reform. They didn't, pass, sort of national gerrymandering reform, right? They didn't there were kind of bills to sort of try to fascist proof the government, and not only did they not hold Trump accountable, but they weren't able to pass any of those because, basically Manchin and Sinema said to be bipartisan, we need to basically keep all these, potentially fascist levers in place so that, the Republicans aren't angry at us because they want to use those fascist levers when they get in power. And so, it's frustrating with the candidates, in terms of discussions about elections. But it's also, like those discussions about elections then become excuses to basically just refuse to do things that you even need to do to just like, which are even like in some self-preservation for Democratic candidates, who like Trump is like threatening to jail, right? So I mean, there's just like there's just a real resistance to doing things when you are in power to crush fascism, which kind of is what you need to do so that I mean, so that you can be in a position where multiracial democracy can flourish and you have less political violence, which is one of the goals.
You're more optimistic than I am with the results of these special elections or results of polling, only in the sense that Democrats aren't behaving that way. They are running scared, despite, I mean, Trump is incredibly unpopular. Like, if you were to the average person who's not plugged in like we are, and we would say, read some headlines about what the GOP has been letting him do and what he's getting passed and how Democrats are responding, they would say that, oh, he must have 60% approval or something. And then but at this point in his presidency, Obama was like at the mid 50s and Republicans were very unified. There was a collective push against him. Like, we're not working with you. Like, there was no one thinking, there was no version of Fetterman. In fact, Marco Rubio gets elected as a Tea Party Republican in 2010 in a state that Obama had just won, would win again in 2012. That also didn't scare Rubio. And Democrats were thinking that because of demographics, which were later proven wrong, that this state would be theirs forever. And, Republicans just weren't, and I'm not trying to glorify Republicans here. I'm just sort of trying to like get a sense of why is there this imbalance? And maybe it goes back to what you'd written before about this, because I am horrified by how, when you have the president of the United States and other candidates, I mean, Ronnie Jackson saying that transgenderism is a virus, that trans people are mentally ill, should be rounded. Like, this is some Nazi crap. And I don't use that term lightly. I've written about not doing that sort of comparison lightly, but this is Nazi shit that they are doing. You have a potential next governor of South Carolina, because I know my home state, unfortunately, Nancy Mace, using a slur for trans people, blaming, like outright bigotry, blaming trans people for a crime that a trans person did not commit. And why I want to see Democratic leaders calling them out and saying, like, how dare you talk about our colleague? Like, there's like Sarah McBride is like the first trans woman, and she has to go to work every day, and this of her colleagues saying this garbage about her and her people, and like, why aren't they saying this is disgusting? How dare you talk about other beings this way?
I mean, it's not that I'm optimistic. I mean, like, I think I'm optimistic about Democrats winning elections. What I'm worried about is that when they win the elections and then they're like, oh yeah, in order to win elections, we need to focus on the next election and not actually take a stand or do anything. That's kind of, I mean, I can see that happening pretty easily, and it's bad, right? I mean, it's a frightening thing to happen, and I think it is in part because, I mean, as you kind of mentioned, and as I've talked about, there's everybody kind of sees rural white voters as heartland Americans, as sort of the touchstone of what authentic Americanness is, and as the votes you want to get. And that's kind of intertwined, right? Because it's like they have, rural white voters have just like vastly disproportionate power, especially in the Senate, to some degree in the Electoral College. But I mean, the Senate means that they also have hugely disproportionate power of the judiciary. So there's this incentive to feel like Democrats have to cater to them because we need to win states like Ohio and Iowa, which are quite conservative. So there's this huge imbalance in the Senate, which sort of pushes them. But in addition to that, like there's it's white supremacy. It's a white supremacist country. People tend to just see white voters as more authentic, which is kind of one of the things that's kind of exciting about Mamdani's campaign, because like Mamdani doesn't do that, right? I mean, Mamdani's like one of the things that's so fun and exhilarating about his campaign ads is that they're all about, it's like, hey, this is New York City, this is America, this is like, this is like this multiracial democracy, and here I am, talking to people from like, talking to Black people, talking to Asian people, talking to Hispanic people, talking to people, from all across the city, and I love them all,
Sure.
and, he talks about ethnic food, he talks about soccer, and he talks about, how like what we want to do is like build a better. He talks about Jewish people in the same way. He's like, we're a multiracial, multi-ethnic city, and that's awesome, right? I think that I don't think there's one solution. I think in a lot of cases you kind of like, the goal is to find somebody who has experience and who has a history in the state or the district and who's pretty well liked, and then you hope the environment is kind of good and you can pick some places off. I mean, I think that's kind of the thing. It's like I think people kind of overestimate how much issue positioning matters. Like Dems are doing pretty good with recruitment, right? I mean, Sherrod Brown is as likely as anyone to win in Ohio, right? And they, I can't remember the name of the guy in Maine who's a progressive guy who Bernie endorsed, but I mean, he seems like an appealing candidate who's would, if midterms look like the polling looks like now, he seems as well positioned as anyone to beat Collins, and so on. Tallarico, right, in Texas, who's like seems like an appealing candidate, who seems like he, if everything goes right, maybe he could win Texas. I mean, it's just it's. I mean, the problem is that it's just this. It's really tilted against Democrats in the Senate, and they're trying to gerrymander to tilt the House against us as well.
Yeah.
So I think gerrymandering California and trying to gerrymander other states is what Democrats should be doing. And again, that's kind of my thing is that, there's just a lot of focus on elections, and elections matter, but you've also really got to you've got to do stuff when you have power to make the playing field more equal and to undermine fascist power, or you're screwed. Governors seem more willing at the moment to take a stand. Gavin Newsom and Pritzker and Hochul have all sort of like talked about why that they need to do gerrymandering. And Newsom and Hochul are not particularly progressive, but they're and Hochul endorsed Mamdani, basically saying he's going to fight, and Andrew Cuomo is in league with Trump, and that's something that Senate Democrats, or that Jeffries isn't willing to say, right? I mean, they're so focused on, we need to keep moderate voters on board, that they won't even say this guy's a surrogate for Donald Trump. We need to unite and fight him. And I think the Senate is in Congress is in a bad position. You don't have a lot of levers when you're in the minority, and there's people are shut it down, and they could certainly shut it down briefly, but I mean, eventually Republicans will just get sick of them and overthrow the filibuster, you know, or I mean, they don't actually have the power to sort of like perpetually shut down the government, and their leverage, you know, they need to be smart about what their leverage is, but they aren't really looking at, you know, like what would actually be like materially powerful and energizing. Instead, it's like, well, what do the marginal poll numbers say about healthcare subsidies, without really like thinking about the fact, like, I mean, Senate, the Congress and Trump have already shown that, like, if you appropriate money that they don't want to spend, they just won't spend it. You know, I mean, like it's like they don't really seem to have moved on to thinking about things that actually matter rather than whatever the poll numbers say.
Mm-hmm.
The
That's why I agreed with you about RFK being an ask that is both would be a tremendous victory, a very public, big victory, but would actually do a lot of good, would save lives like immediately.
It would be a big victory. It would save lives, and you might be able to win it because Republicans don't really like him. I mean, he wasn't a Republican a year ago, you know, and Republicans, I feel like people don't know this, but the whole reason there was this crisis at the CDC and that RFK fired the Republican appointee is because RFK tried to get in an anti-vax school in the CDC, and Republicans blocked him. You know, people like, I mean, Murkowski was the face of that, but I presume it was also Cassidy and McConnell and Collins, and quite possibly like Tillis and Barrasso, who have also, you know, and I mean, maybe other people too, you know, I mean, like people aren't necessarily eager to see, like, you know, another pandemic sweeping through their constituents. And, you know, so RFK is like really the worst possible person in that position. And Republicans have already shown that they're not eager to sort of like put more anti-vax people in office. So he's really somebody who Republicans might say, you know, they might kick a bit and then say, oh, sure, screw that guy, you know, or if they don't do that, at least you're like forcing them to, like, you know, be like, we would rather, you know, we would rather destroy vaccines than pass a budget with you. Right. I mean, so like, I mean, it would be like a big profile issue. If you win, it's a big win. You're splitting the Republicans, and it like would do something concrete. And like the polling isn't, you know, because RFK's polling is weird because people don't really know who he is. I think people confuse him with his father. You know, they see him as a kind of bipartisan figure. But I think that if you pick this fight, his approval would plummet, which would be good also. So it's sort of like picking things where you could actually like, where you could win and make a difference, rather than things where you feel like, oh, this polls well, so it's gonna like give us a percentage point in the elections.
Yeah,
like those are like pretty different focuses, and Schumer and Jeffries just seem unable to understand that that regular budget negotiations are just like not on the table.
They're negotiating as if things are normal, and if I framed it, it was like when people say elections have consequences, and I can find that a frustrating statement, but when you're talking about your standard, normal, terrible, when we are in power, we screw the poor over, that Republicans do, I don't like that, but that's the consequence of democracy. They're going to do things that are along those lines. Like, the damage RFK's doing is extreme. So the idea that like anyone's advising Democrats to focus on stuff like healthcare or that's real hard, all this stuff that's terrible, but that's along with like President Haley probably would have done that. President McCain, these are all sort of normal, and terrible things.
You know, they keep saying, "Oh, why won't we want to be bipartisan partners with the president?" And it's like he's shooting, he's like murdering people at sea. He's kidnapping families. He's like destroying cancer research. what bipartisan initiatives do you want to be part of?
With all this, deification of Charlie Kirk, and when they talk about the vice president, oh, he was taken out of context, and all this stuff, where Rashida Tlaib's getting attacked for using from the river from the well, if you use this expression, you are promoting genocide. But obviously, this guy who says the worst things about trans people, who says that like black and statements that again, and I agree sometimes, like, okay, well, that's a clearly anti-Semitic trope. Don't say that. Means anti-Semitism. But then at the same time, saying, oh, well, this is a good faith disagreement with about DEI and affirmative action. It's like, no, it's not. Like, someone born in the 90s no longer has the excuse of being like, oh, well, if you prioritize diversity, that means that the planes are going to fall out of the sky. That's racist. Sorry, that's a racist statement, because all like trying to, I've been in a situation where someone has tried to find, oh, we need more Black writers. It doesn't mean that I'm illiterate. It is just like, oh, let me prioritize this. And if you want to argue that this is unfair to say we should be able to continue to have all white writers or whatever, and we shouldn't, fine. That's actually an argument if you want to make it about fairness in that way. But Kirk was never doing that. Kirk was deliberately stating like any effort at diversity is essentially going to get you unqualified candidates, and that is inherently racist. And so to be able to say that, to whereas for Mandami, it's like, oh, well, Jewish, I can't endorse him because Jewish people are very afraid, and that's his donors, not even like the actual Jewish people in the
Jewish people gave him majority support.
Yeah,
and and like the stuff they're saying. I mean, I don't think From the River to the Sea is inherently, a call for genocide. I think a lot of Palestinians, are talking about justice for everyone and, freedom and peace for everyone. But like in that, because they're all living together. So you want, sort of From the River to the Sea means everybody should be free and everybody should be equal and everybody should have rights. I think for a lot of people who talk about it, and I'm personally like, the Palestinian people are currently undergoing a genocide, and they've been, persecuted and tormented for generations now. And, I'm just very leery of sort of like treating their expressions of solidarity as, somehow innately evil.
Yeah.
But even saying that, Mamdani didn't even say it.
No.
Like, he doesn't say From the River to the Sea. What he says is, I don't want to condemn it, but it's not a phrase I use.
Oh, yeah. Like globalized.
Then he talks about why he doesn't want to say it and why he's leery of condemning it outright. And that is pretty different than Charlie Kirk saying that he wants to stone LGBT people to death. Right?
Well, he didn't say that. He just said that that's God's great law, and I'm a Christian. Like, wink, wink. Like all the sort of stuff that's like, and I'm not trying to do this sort of oppression Olympics or compare. I'm just saying that least of like when attempts have been made to censor Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian, I would think Jeffries, and that has to be politically, just on a moral ground, why have you not initiated a censor against a member of Congress who is not only on a complete, harassment campaign of one of your own caucus members? Like, that's insane. The way she had attacked and bullied Sarah McBride from the jump, and then to using actual known slurs in the House. Like the fact that you have even tried, get Republicans on record saying we support her, calling people trans, get Republicans on record of doing it.
Bigotry isn't a distraction from fascism, right? I mean, it's like, it's a strategy to, bigotry is a strategy to make oppression palatable, but the oppression is like in the interest of targeting, disfavored groups. I mean, it's just not it isn't a distraction. It's sort of like it's what fascism is. It's both a goal and a strategy. And I mean, you could see, Democrats again, they want to say it's a distraction because the idea is the only thing that really matters is what appeals to a rural white Trump voter. And our only real interest is in getting those people to vote for us rather than in defending the people who are already, I mean, LGBT people are like, core to the Democratic coalition. I mean, obviously they're not concentrated in one place and there are not huge numbers of them, but Democrats would like lose a lot if LGBT people weren't voting for them at huge rates.
Mm-hmm.
And same with black people, I mean, there's just like, but there's just this like discomfort with being the party of multiracial democracy. It's like the Democrats are the party of multiracial democracy, but they often like really seem to feel like they'd rather not be, or that that they just wish that they could get those working class white voters, by which they just mean white voters, that they could just be the party of white voters voting against the billionaires. And it's just like
that's not true. I mean,
that's never been what elections in the US have been about. And it's just like we have this like explicitly fascist administration. You've got to be willing to take a stand for people they're coming after.
And this is, I think I get it. You do need to win more with white voters when they are majority of the electorate. I get it. And I get how the Senate works. I get all of that. Though, Schumer famously stated that for every working class white person we lost, we will gain a college educated, two college educated, which didn't pan out and also would have been a very different party. And so I do think the Democrats trying to be a working class party is not removed from supporting, because queer people are working class and black people are working class, and from not overtly trying to help people who are under the gun, right? Like, just that was always when the Harris campaign failed to respond to they them, and the lesson from that was that trans rights was a losing issue. And I got in trouble in Blue Sky for saying that we needed to prove it was a winning issue. And people said, how dare we have to prove anything? You hate queer trans people. And my point with that was not to sort of say that anyone's rights are for a debate, but just that we need to prove, either by supporting someone like Pritzker or other who supports queer rights, to show that it is to encourage people for whom it's winning. It is better to be positive in that aspect than to be negative and saying, I don't like Newsom or not voting for him. That's fine, but you need to also say, here's where I'm going to throw my support towards, and it will help. And that creates because right now we have people who think that they can't articulate a message of defending against the most marginalized people. That's been the theme. And you've written about that. It's like that whole poem about they came for first. It's like, it's in real time, and we're not sort of learning from that at all. So I'll let you have the final word. Any other, thinking about what we've seen from the response, particularly from the left, for the Kirk situation, that had surprised you, or what can we do to sort of try to protect queer people who are really gonna get scapegoated for this, do you think?
God, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I think people speaking up about it is helpful. Because I mean, there have been people who have sort of like been prominent and in and spoken up at some cost about in sort of like largest venues about how important it is to sort of like be honest about what Kirk stood for, and to reject the political violence and the smears and the bigotry that he often advocated. You know, Elizabeth Spears wrote a piece at The Nation. Jamel Bowie wrote a piece at New York Times, um, and Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a piece at Variety. You know, and they all are, you know, because of that, they're getting death threats. You know, being attacked. Obama actually had a good statement
I
about
saw
it.
that as well.
But I think that, you know, also, like, to the extent if you are in institutions, or, you know, the academy, or any, you know, or the media. I mean, if you're in places where people are coming at you and saying, "Oh, you need to get rid of this person," you know, it's super helpful if people will just say, you know, no, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna, you know, let fascists tell me, you know, that you have to, what you're allowed to say in the
Hmm.
public discourse. And you know, I think that's really important right now, is
Yeah.
kind of solidarity and people who are in a position at, you know, at these institutions to sort of like actually be aware of what's happening.
And
And
humanizing those issues, right? Because Republicans, Huckabee and Cruz, like, went to Kim Davis when she was, who refused to give a wedding marriage license to a gay couple. When people were imprisoned for violating stay-at-home orders, Republicans would usually take this person, make them the face of the issue, make it so that, like, look what's being done to them. They cry on Fox News, but that helps. It humanizes the issue. And I feel like there's just all these people getting fired for nonsense reasons that are allowed to just be a big statistic that Republicans state. And if you just put this person on television and then show that they just said, you know, literally listed things that Kirk said and then got fired, I think that would be important. Like, you need to sort of human, and I wish our elected officials on the left would get that, the importance of
we do more of
humanizing
that.
the victim. Thank you so much for
Oh,
your
thanks for
time.
having me. Of
And
course.
where can people check you out again?
My blog, my newsletter is everythingishorrible.net. And I write for Public Notice Weekly, so that's a place to find me too. And I'm on Blue Sky. It's
All right,
Noah Berlatsky. All right.
take care. I
Thank you.
can like, share, subscribe. Bye bye.